Hey guys, this is going to be the second video in our series about buying land in Japan. If you haven't seen the first one, you can find it on the Buying a House in Japan playlist. Who saw this coming? But again, it's really only going to be of interest to people who are either going to be buying a house or land in Japan, or maybe doing business in Japan. Maybe somebody like that might find it a little bit interesting, a bit of an insight into those experiences, or other people may be interested in a more broad aspect of Japanese culture. But anyway, here it is. So those of you who saw the first one know where we're up to so far. It took 6 weeks to get from making an offer that was 5% off the asking price to actually getting a contract signed. So after 6 weeks, we finally got to meet with the real estate agent and signed a contract after 6 weeks, right? So just a little bit interesting aspect of this too. This agent is the same agent that sold us a house. So we've already been through this process with him once, and when we bought the house, we had to sit with him for 3 hours while he described every clause in the contract. And it's interesting because in a lot of countries, usually real estate contract will have, or any sort of contract, will usually have some clause that refers to the relevant law in that state or in that country. So, you know, this contract is made subject to the laws of California, or this contract is made subject to the laws of London, or whatever it happens to be. And then after that, the contract can be reasonably short, because all the relevant rules and laws and regulations and things are all contained in another law somewhere else, so you don't need to have it all written in the contract. Whereas in Japan, it seems that a lot of the relevant laws are actually written into the contract, and so there's a lot of it. You know, what happens under this circumstances, and if this happens, what will happen? If that happens, what will happen? And a lot of the clauses are actually irrelevant to us, or not relevant to us, and it'll actually have underneath the clause, it'll say whether it applies, yes or no. And even when it didn't apply to us, he still insisted on reading it and explaining it to us. So every single clause in the contract, so even the ones that when it said, and so he'd read it to us, he'd explain it, and then he'd say, and of course in this case it doesn't apply. So having spent 10 minutes explaining that particular clause, and in this case it doesn't apply. So another interesting aspect too that you might want to consider if you're going to be buying here is that these real estate agents play a more active role in the actual sale than they might do in other countries. And there's no actual solicitor involved. At the end, there's sort of a conveyancer involved at the end, but the real estate agent actually plays a lot bigger part than he does in a lot of other countries, and he has an obligation to make sure that you understand all the clauses in the contract. Whereas a lot of other countries, you know, it's up to the buyer or the seller to make themselves aware of the meaning of the contract, you know, and quite often people show it to their solicitor first and get told that it's okay, and then they go ahead and sign it, or what, you know, all sorts of different ways of doing it, isn't there? Whereas in Japan, the real estate agent has an obligation to explain it to you, so that's why they do that. Now, because of that, even though we've been through this process with the same guy before, who'd spent 3 hours last time explaining every clause in the contract, he felt he needed to do it again, and he also, because he's not used to dealing with foreigners, and this is, we're the first foreigners, well, I'm the first foreigner that he's actually dealt with, so he's not really used to it. And even though we've had a fair bit of dealing now, he's still not used to it. And this is quite common when you do business in Japan. You'll experience this in other aspects of doing business here too. If people aren't used to dealing with foreigners, or even just generally in Japan, if people aren't used to communicating with foreigners, quite often they'll have a bit of a mental block about it and just not know how to communicate with you. And it doesn't matter how good your Japanese might be, and you might have heard this referred to from other people who have visited Japan before. It doesn't matter how good your Japanese is. If you're sitting with Japanese people and you speak Japanese to restaurant staff or to other people, you might find that they answer to the Japanese person instead of to you, and that's exactly what can often happen when you're doing business, and it can be really frustrating. So you're sitting talking to the bank manager and you say something, and they turn to the Japanese person who's with you and answer you. And that is exactly what we just went through with this guy, because what happened was, he said he was really concerned that I understand everything in the contract. So I said to him, it's okay. I trust you. And no, I have to explain every clause. I said, well, okay, well, look, how about my accountant works for me, so he's independent. How about I give the contract to him, and he can check it and tell me if it's okay, and then that's an independent advisor has given me the advice. No, can't do that either. So the only thing that he would accept then, I said to him, well, how about I get a translator? I'll get a translator to sit there and explain anything to me that you want to explain. And he said, oh, that's good, let's do that. So I had to pay a lady I know who's a professional translator to come and sit in on our meeting while we went through this contract. Now, it turned out that on the day that we had to do it, the official translator lady was sick. I made a video about this recently. She caught a cold, right? So it was game over. Sorry, I caught a cold, I can't come. And we'd already waited 6 weeks to get this contract, so didn't want to wait any longer. So I contacted another lady who can speak a little bit of English, not much, and said to her, are you available? Can you come and meet me for this meeting? And she said yes. So she came with me and she sat there, and she doesn't know anything about, she's never bought a house either in Japan, so she doesn't know, or she's never bought a house anywhere. She's Japanese. She's never bought a house anywhere, and knows nothing about real estate dealings at all, and her English isn't that good, really. But the real estate guy speaks no English at all, so he doesn't know that. So what we did was she sat there, and he explained everything to her. He sat there for 2.5 hours. He did it, took 2.5 hours this time. And he sat there and explained every clause in the contract to her, and her face became more and more blank as the time went on, because it was just exhausting. It was really exhausting. It was exhausting for her because she didn't know any of this stuff. It's real estate law, and so she'd never heard any of this stuff before. So it got more and more difficult for her, and you could see in her face she just wasn't getting it, you know. And so what I was doing is, as it explained every clause, I'd say to him, it's okay, I understand. And then I'd say something to him to show him that I did understand. So I'd say, okay, so what you just said was that, you know, we have to make sure that the land slopes away from the dividing land and all this sort of stuff, and every clause, and had to show him that, yes, I understood it. And the end result was that she sat there for 2.5 hours and contributed nothing, right? She contributed by being there. But the point of this is, the point of explaining this is that you might experience this in Japan if you do business here. If it's something important that you want to do, it doesn't matter how good your Japanese is, if you're dealing with someone here who's not used to dealing with a foreigner, they may not get their head around it. And so this guy, even though what was happening is he'd explain a clause to her, and I'd say, it's okay, I got it. I understand what you just said, you said this. And even though I was doing that for 2.5 hours, he continued to speak to her till the very end. He continued to look at her and explain to her till the very end. And she was just getting more and more baffled, and it was obvious to me she was getting more and more baffled. So I just kept interrupting before she'd get to any point where she had to say anything, and I'd just say to him, look, it's okay, I understood it, what you said was this. And demonstrate to him that I understood what he'd explained. And, you know, and again, even the clauses that weren't relevant to us, he'd still explain that clause. And then he'd say, but it's not relevant to you. And then I'd have to say to him, okay, so what you're saying is if the land had a dividing something or other, or pipes running through it, then you'd have to, yeah, okay. So anyway, 2.5 hours later, finally got the contract signed. So then, okay, so the next step for us is we have to pay a 10% deposit, because we still haven't paid a 10% deposit. So for this six weeks, there's been nothing binding about this agreement at all. So okay, so he gives us the bank details of the owner. Now in a lot of countries, your deposit and whatever money you pay goes to a third person, doesn't it? It goes to the real estate agent's trust account, or it goes to a solicitor's trust account, or it goes usually to an independent party, doesn't it? Whereas in Japan, the money that the buyer pays, the deposit that the buyer pays up front, goes straight to the owner. Which means if there is any dramas later on, you actually have to go back to the owner to try and recover your $20,000 in this case. So it's about $200,000, $210,000 block of land, so I'm going to pay $20,000. So okay, he gives us the owner's bank details and says, so you'll need to transfer $20,000 into this person's bank account for the deposit. Okay, we can do that. And then I said to him, so at the settlement, at the final day, when we finally get it all together, what about the balance? What about the other 190,000? And he said, oh, he started explaining something. I said to him, look, I'm happy to transfer it. You know, I have a lot of faith in Japanese people. You know, once in business, had somebody do the wrong thing by us in Japan, but other than that, it's very rare. So $190,000, and I said, okay, well, I'm happy to transfer it a day or two before settlement to make sure the owners got it when we were there for settlement. Oh no, it's too dangerous. He's saying it's too dangerous, you can't do that. So I said, okay, so what should we do? He said, you have to open a bank account at the same bank and the same branch as the owner of the land. And then on the day of settlement, we'll meet at that bank and you'll have the 190,000 in your bank account at that bank and that branch and transfer it to the owner. Which means it's not a huge deal, but it adds to the faffing. You know, we made a video about the faffing before. It adds to the faffing. It means that we have to go to that bank, open another bank account that we'll never use again at a branch that's not convenient to us. It's actually in the next town, just so that we can transfer the money to the guy. And I said, isn't there another way? Can't we do a bank check, or can't we transfer it from our account to his account, or isn't there anything else we can do, you know, in the 21st century, you know, other than having to open another bank account that we'll never use? I mean, it just adds to the level of faffing, and the end result was, no, it's all too hard. That's the only thing we can do. Okay, so it's the only thing we can do. So, okay, all right, okay, fair enough. So today's mission was to go to the next town where that bank and branch is. And oh no, so sorry. So then we had to transfer the $20,000. So okay, so we got online to our Japanese bank and did a transfer from our Japanese bank account to the owner's bank, Japanese bank account, for that initial $20,000, right? So did that, and now later it bounced back, and we got an email saying that bank transfer couldn't go through because the details weren't correct. So I called the real estate agent up and said, well, those bank details, you know, that money, that $20,000 bounced back. It said the details weren't correct. So wait another few hours, and he calls back and says, no, those details are correct, it's okay. Okay, try again, bounce back again. And then he says, oh, okay, so we'll have to do it in cash, okay? Rightio. And fortunately, ATMs in Japan, not all of them, but a lot of ATMs in Japan have $20,000 limits. So you can actually go to an ATM in Japan if you've got a Japanese bank account and withdraw $20,000, which is pretty cool. So, okay, a bit more faffing. So we'll go get the $20,000 in cash, and we'll drive it over to the next town and deposit it into that owner's bank account. Oh, by the way, $20,000 in cash, there it is. It's $20,000, 2 million yen. So we'll take the 2 million yen over to the next town and we'll deposit into that owner's bank account. So, and at the same time, make use of our time and open an account at that bank and branch so that we can do the transfer, you know, when the thing settles. So we drove to the next town, walk in, show the details that were faxed to us with the owner's bank details, and they looked at it, went away and checked it on the computer and came back and said, no, sorry, we don't know that customer. We can't find any record of that customer. So the details are wrong. So the next bit that's going to happen is the real estate agent's going to come and collect the 20 grand from us and take it and give it to the owner, okay? And then we're going to have to find out what his real bank is and his real bank details are, and go and open a bank account at that bank. It might end up being the same branch, possibly. It's possible they've just given him the wrong name or something. So I mean, those of you who've bought property in other countries will probably be sitting there shaking your head at this. I mean, it just doesn't end. It just goes on and on, the faffing. And so once we get this 20 grand paid over, we're like, well, we're ready to go. We're ready to go on this place. We've got plans. We need to get it done, you know. And he says, so now we're up to, where are we now? Middle of January. And he said, okay, so the next step that they've got to do is the same as we went through with the house that we showed you. They have to survey it because the land, obviously here, the blocks of land are really old, you know, the way they're divided up, you know, hundreds of years ago. And so they're not really sure where the boundaries are. So in the contract, it actually says that the land size is approximately this, and that will be confirmed after a survey is done. And so what they have to do is actually have to survey, and I mean, surveying land when you're buying land is pretty normal in most countries, but the difference is that usually you already have an idea of where the boundaries are, whereas in Japan you don't. You really don't. And quite often it can be really different from what it looks like. In actual fact, when we bought the house, the neighbour's house, one of the neighbour's houses actually overhung the boundary, because when they built that house they weren't really sure where the boundary was, and that happens. So you can get a survey done to buy the land and find that the neighbour's house overhangs, or if you're buying a house here, you might find your house actually overhangs the neighbour's land, so which can get really messy, right? So the next step is that within the next month, he said, so we've got to wait another month, the surveyor's going to go and survey the land and find out where the boundaries are. And then what they have to do is the real estate agent then has to go to each neighbour. Now there's actually 4 properties that adjoin that piece of land, and plus the front footpath, which actually belongs to the city. So he has to go to 4 companies, in this case it's businesses. He has to go to the 4 people who own the neighbouring land, 4 different people that own the neighbouring land, and get them to sign a form that says they've seen the survey pegs and they're not disputing them, right? And plus he has to go to the city and get the city to sign a letter to say the same thing, that they've seen the survey pegs and they're not disputing them. So once that 5 groups of people, you know, the 4 private ones and the city, all have signed the document that says they're not disputing the boundaries and that they're all happy with where the boundaries have been marked, then the next step can happen. So he's actually estimated that it's going to take another 3 months by the time they get the survey done and then get around to those those different people and get those documents signed and get the next step done and the next step's done. But it's going to be another 3 months to the 4th month. So it's until April, which will be a total from when we said we wanted to buy it until when it gets settled. We've got an estimate now of 5 months in total, which is incredible, isn't it? So it's just what's happening. I mean, the reason we're making these videos is just for anybody that might be going to buy here in the future. It's just a heads up to know what to expect, and to let you know that you're just going to require lots and lots of patience, and just have to be really cool and just be really, really patient, and just expect this is exactly what it's going to be like for you. You just have to be really patient and just, okay, thank you. Thank you for doing that. And that's all we can do. So that's where we are now. So now we're just waiting for the guy to come around and collect. Let's just have a quick look at that again. 2 million yen. Waiting for him to come around and collect his 2 million yen. And then we just have to sit back and wait. Then there's nothing else that we can really do. The only other thing that we're going to have to do, of course, is to go and open that bank account. That's probably because we're actually going to pay by cash, because it's probably the case that usually if you get a bank loan, you'd probably go to the place where you're getting the loan from, and that bank would then give that money. I don't know, no idea how they do that. I mean, the bank, if you borrowed money to buy, that bank would somehow have to get that money into that person's bank account, and they don't seem to like doing the bank transfer, so no idea how they do that. But you just got to go with it. On that first video that we did, now if you want to see that first one, if you haven't seen it, it's on the Buying a House in Japan playlist. There was a couple of people on there talking about how they, can you do it yourself? Can you cut the real estate agent out? Because the real estate agent, we're paying him $7,500 for what he's doing. So obviously that's a fair lump, and then the owner will be paying his real estate agent probably the same. So there's some people on there, can you cut them out? Well, the first thing would have to be that you'd have to do all this stuff that this real estate agent's doing. You would have to be able to do it yourself. And the other thing is you'd have to get people to deal with you, and it's not real likely that they would. You know, they just, you know, as explained, getting our real estate agent that we're paying $7,500 to just to listen to me, the money's coming out of my pocket, I'm paying him, I'm his customer, and he's a really good guy, he's a really, really good guy. But just getting him to listen to me and do what I'm asking him to do is really, really tricky. So it's likely that if you tried to do any of this yourself, which it's not likely even legally you'd be able to, who knows. But if you did try and do this yourself, it's likely nobody would deal with you. You know, you'd turn up at the other agent and say, oh, I want to make an offer on that place. And he'd say, where's your agent? Oh, I'm not using one. And he'd probably just say, well, sorry, you've got to use one. That's what we do here. And he'd say, oh, I'm going to do it myself. And no, sorry, it's not what we do here. Probably what they'd say. And then, that's what would keep happening to you. And if you could get over that hurdle, which is probably not real likely, then you've got to go around to all those people. You know, you've got to get the surveyor to go and do the survey. And then after he's done the survey, then you've got to go around to all those people with the right documents and get them to sign all the right documents. It's just, they wouldn't deal with you. They really wouldn't. You know, it's really, and we come across this all the time doing business in Japan. You know, it's not uncommon in Japan if you send emails to people in Japan, to businesses in Japan about different things, to not get answers. It's quite common. We actually had, we've had, there's a million examples of this, but we had another one where place we bought an air conditioning system from was promoting credit cards. And they said, oh, you know, would you like to sign up for a credit card? And yeah, okay, we'll have a credit card. And spent half an hour there faffing around getting the credit card until the person on the other end of the phone at the credit card company heard the name, heard our name and said, is that a foreigner? And the person at the credit card company, at the electrical company said, yes it is. Oh geez, nah, sorry. That was the end of it. So it does still happen in Japan. It does still happen in Japan. Oh, foreigner, we don't know how to deal with that. And just, oh, it's too difficult. And so yeah, the answer to those people who are, you know, I want to do it myself, no. You might want to look at another video we made about that too. You know, everyone in Japan means you too. So, you know, it's just a natural thing. Those of us who've grown up in other cultures often think like that. If there's something that we don't think is necessary, we can do it another way. Well, we want to do it our way. It's a natural way for a lot of us to think, but you can't think like that here. Well, you can, but no one will cooperate with you. That's the problem, you know. That's the problem, is you can want to do it your own way and do it differently and do it yourself and everything else, but getting other people to cooperate with you so you can achieve that is really, really difficult. Usually impossible. Usually impossible, as you've seen in these examples. So anyway, that was step 2. Let's see what happens next. More videos coming soon.